Okay, let's stop pretending this was just another game. It wasn't. This was an absolute spectacle.
It was something else.
We are diving into what has to be the highest scoring deep dive we have ever attempted. I mean, a clash that ended 50-49.
Incredible numbers.
Seattle 50, Atlanta 49. And the Seahawks walked out of there 10-2 because, and this is the crucial part, they went for the win when the game demanded absolute clarity. We've collected the articles, the research, all the analytical breakdowns, and the central question we're unpacking for you today is right there in that razor-thin final point.
Right there in the 1 point.
Was this truly a triumphant, a strategic victory that defined modern football? Or was it a desperate, maybe fortunate survival based on a reckless string of high-risk decisions that just happened to pay off?
See, I appreciate the enthusiasm, I really do. But I refuse to let that final score completely define the whole narrative.
How can it not?
Well, to call it an undisputed victory that ignores the fundamental data. Seattle didn't outclass Atlanta, not by a long shot. They survived them.
Survived with a W.
They did, but if you break down the totality of the game, the 4 quarters, you look at the possession metrics, the sheer yardage, this game truly could have gone either way. The tension we have to examine today is all about philosophy.
Aggression versus control.
Exactly. Atlanta had the steadier, you could even argue more disciplined night, and yet they lost. That's a paradox we really have to wrestle with.
And that is precisely our mission for this deep dive. We are not just looking at a final scoreboard that screams decisive win because it ended in regulation.
No, we have to go deeper.
We are unpacking that philosophical clash right at the core of this monumental win. The victory is a fact, 50-49, but were the fundamental high-leverage decisions that engineered that final point, were they strategically sound?
Or were they just lucky?
Exactly. Were they merely successful this one time, making Seattle maybe the luckiest 10-2 team in the entire league? We're diving deep into the sources that detail this offensive explosion and rigorously questioning the strategic soundness of the whole winning philosophy.
We really need to move past the celebration. Was Seattle's ability to pull ahead in those last moments a sign of superior, repeatable execution? Or was it just the natural outcome when you bet everything on these highly volatile, high-variance plays?
It's a huge question.
We've got 2 high-powered teams, identical touchdown counts for their quarterbacks, and yet 2 vastly different approaches to offense. One philosophy won out, and we need to understand the analytical cost and really the long-term implications of that victory. So let's start with the guys who manufacture those 99 points.
Let's do it. The quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's really unpack this quarterback duel, because this is the fundamental hinge point. This is where the modern, aggressive mindset just clashes directly with that legacy-structured way of thinking.
It was a perfect case study.
And when you look at the raw output, it is so hard to argue for survival. Jalen Milroe, the Seattle quarterback, he was magnificent.
The numbers are undeniable.
He threw for 411 yards and 6 touchdowns. 6. That's not just surviving, that's answering every single punch Atlanta threw at him. And it was a barrage, 49 points worth, and then throwing a counterpunch that was always harder, always better timed. That feels like undisputed dominance in output, even if it looked a little chaotic getting there.
Okay, output, I'll give you output, certainly. But let's talk about process and stability for a second.
All right.
And we absolutely have to put Kirk Cousins' night in context here.
Okay, fair enough.
He threw for 379 yards and 6 touchdowns himself. Identical touchdown numbers, yes, but, and this is crucial, they were achieved with fewer plays that put the ball in jeopardy. Fewer opportunities for those catastrophic errors within the structure.
So cleaner game.
A much cleaner game. You seem obsessed with the splash plays, the high-flying improvisations that Milroe is known for, but structure, efficiency, and consistency, those are the reliable pillars that win championships deep in the playoffs.
But do they win you a 50-49 game?
Cousins provided that consistency, and the sources all suggest his process was superior from a risk management perspective.
I would argue that superior process is a lovely label until you look up at the scoreboard and realize that process fell 1 single point short.
It's a fair point, but let's define the difference.
Let's really define that structural difference. Atlanta's approach with Cousins was crystal clear. Run the offense exactly as it was drawn up on the whiteboard.
Yes.
The sources show Cousins' time to throw was consistently shorter. His completion percentage on throws to his first and second reads was just. It was elite. It was hovering in the high 80s for most of the night.
Which is incredibly efficient.
That is controlled execution. It's minimizing risk by maximizing the potential of the initial play design.
And that controlled execution is a massive virtue, especially in a game environment where it was clear from the first quarter that defensive stops were going to be nearly impossible.
It was an offensive shootout from the get-go.
Absolutely. So the goal of that structural discipline is to maximize your yardage per attempt while minimizing the opportunities for those high-leverage, catastrophic errors like turnovers. Cousins operated with surgical precision.
He rarely left the pocket.
He was consistently finding the soft spots in Seattle's zone, delivering the ball precisely on time from a solid base. He trusted the system to provide the advantage. And analytically, that's the safest, most repeatable path to success. The sources we looked at point out that a vast majority of his attempts were against these 5- or 6-man fronts, where the play was specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Seattle's, frankly, passive coverage.
But that's my point, that drawn-up success is exactly what proved insufficient when you're facing an offense that is capable of putting up 50 points.
So you're saying the plan itself was the problem?
The plan was perfect until it wasn't enough. Atlanta was running the blueprint and they were executing it perfectly. But what happens when the defense collapses? When the play breaks down or the defense adjusts mid-drive and your primary read is suddenly covered?
That's where the structure is tested.
That's where the script ends, and that's where Seattle improvised. Milroe's ability to extend plays, to scramble outside the pocket when that initial structure failed, that is what gave them the ultimate advantage in drive sustainability.
And that improvisation is, analytically speaking, a very high-risk proposition. We can't just celebrate the success of it without acknowledging the variance.
But you have to take the risk to get the reward.
Of course, but let's quantify it. When Milroe extends plays, which he did successfully on at least 5 separate third-down conversions in this game, he significantly increases the risk profile of that entire possession. He invites sacks that can knock you out of field goal range. He increases the probability of an off-platform throw that results in an interception. He even invites defensive holding penalties that extend the down but can also lead to chaos.
But it worked.
It did. While Cousins was efficient on his first read, let's say 85% successful, Milroe's success on these extended chaotic plays might only be 60%. But the reward is exponential. You get a 40-yard completion instead of a 7-yard dump off.
And that's the necessary evolution of modern football.
Yeah.
When you face an offense that is scoring on nearly every single possession, relying on a static, drawn-up script becomes a death sentence.
So predictability is the enemy.
In a game like this, absolutely. Atlanta's structure allowed them to maintain pace to keep up, but Milroe's improv allowed Seattle to accelerate the pace when they needed to. He answered every defensive adjustment, not by retreating to the safety of the playbook, but by creating a new structure in that moment.
It's pure creativity under fire.
Exactly. The sources highlighted 2 key Milroe plays in the third quarter. One was a scramble drill touchdown, where he ran to his right for what felt like an eternity 8 seconds before finding JSN in the back of the end zone.
I remember that play. The defense looked completely lost.
And the other was a 3rd and long conversion where the pocket just collapsed around him and he somehow kept the play alive. Cousins never provided that chaotic, off-schedule relief valve.
But again, if both quarterbacks finish with 6 touchdowns, we have to look deeper at what constitutes meaningful variance.
What do you mean?
Cousins maximized the potential of the structure by operating at peak efficiency within it. Milroe maximized the potential of the down, the distance, and the defense by creating opportunities when the structure failed. The sources point out that Milroe had nearly 40 more air yards than Cousins did,
Wow.
which indicates a commitment to pushing the ball downfield aggressively. Inherently, that means a lower completion percentage, but a much higher scoring potential per drive.
So the conclusion here has to be that in this specific 50-point game, having the creativity to extend past the known structure was the decisive factor. Structure is great until the opponent anticipates it.
And improvisation introduces a chaos that defense just can't prepare for.
Exactly. Atlanta was reliant on precision. One minor defensive error, one misstep in protection, and the entire drive could stall out. Seattle was reliant on creation. A broken play for them often turned into a first down or a touchdown because Milroe could simply keep writing the script.
The sheer difficulty of defending those second chance plays.
It's impossible. The defense thinks they've won the down, they've done their job, only to see him escape and make a play. That is what ultimately maximized Seattle's possessions into points, rather than just yards.
It really is the difference between being a master craftsman, following a detailed, proven plan, and being a brilliant artist who can sketch something magnificent on the fly.
That's a great way to put it.
Both quarterbacks were masterful, but one left less to chance within the flow of the game. That was Cousins, prioritizing efficiency. The other one, Milroe, he embraced the chaos, prioritizing those high-leverage outcomes.
And the outcome suggests that embracing the chaos, however terrifying it might be for a defensive coordinator or, a traditionalist, is the only way to escape the gravitational pull of overtime when you have a chance to end it. Milroe's variance, while risky, was the necessary fuel for a 50-point output. Now we have to shift focus to the key weapons on both sides, because this is another place where that philosophical split just manifests itself so clearly. It's about controlling the game flow versus simply dictating the final result. And Atlanta, they had the definitional dominator, the guy who commanded the whole field and dictated every defensive deployment.
Absolutely. The conversation has to begin and maybe even end with Bijan Robinson for Atlanta. His performance was truly astonishing, and it demands a full analytical breakdown.
The numbers are just staggering.
He wasn't just productive. He was structurally integrated into every single facet of their offense. We're talking about 130 rushing yards plus another 155 receiving yards.
It's insane. A total of 285 scrimmage yards and 3 total touchdowns. And that includes that explosive 80-yard play that just seemed to change the entire momentum in the third quarter.
That is systemic dominance, plain and simple. And it gave Atlanta complete control of the game for long stretches.
He was unbelievable. He generated, nearly 3/5 of Atlanta's total yardage all by himself? Robinson's total output undeniably suggests Atlanta held a massive strategic advantage in terms of sheer yardage generation and sustained movement.
For most of the game, they looked like the team that belonged in control.
They really did.
And that's the key distinction, and it connects directly back to what we were saying about Cousins' structural play. Robinson's performance wasn't just about accumulating yards. It was about controlling the pace and the very geometry of the field.
Explain that, the geometry of the field.
When a running back is a credible threat to rush for over 100 yards and catch for over 100 yards, defenses are forced into this constant state of compromise. Seattle's defense could not commit their linebackers to run defense without exposing their secondary to play action deep.
So they were always guessing.
Always. And they couldn't rely on light coverage packages, even when Atlanta was in obvious passing situations, because Robinson could just gash them on a screen or a draw.
The sources we looked at show Seattle had to repeatedly run a lighter nickel package of 4-2-5 for almost 70% of the game just to try and match Atlanta's personnel.
And Robinson immediately exploited that. He forced those 2 linebackers to cover him vertically down the seam. He was dictating the whole flow, forcing Seattle to constantly react to him.
His presence was a superior strategic advantage, you're right. It forced Seattle to compromise their entire defensive structure, which, in turn, allowed Cousins to operate with higher efficiency against favorable matchups.
That is how you control a game. You have a player who dictates how the defense lines up and what plays they're most vulnerable to.
Okay, fair enough. Robinson dictated the pace and the defensive strategy, but Seattle had the closer. They had the guy who showed up when pace control stops mattering and points are the only currency that counts.
You are, of course, referring to Jackson Smith-Njigba, JSN.
Jackson Smith-Njigba! Look at his clutch stats. 7 catches, 137 yards, 3 touchdowns. While Robinson was methodically carving up the field and forcing defenses to adapt over 4 quarters, JSN was dictating the scoreboard.
That's about timing.
It's all about timing and efficiency of the targets. JSN was targeted heavily in the red zone and in these high-leverage third-down situations. He showed up every single time Atlanta needed a stop. Every time Seattle needed an immediate, explosive response to Robinson's sustained brilliance.
He converts pressure into points.
He converts high-pressure moments into maximum points.
JSN certainly had the volume and the finishing power, I won't deny that. And his connection with Milroe in those improvised scramble drill moments was absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
However, defining his role as simply dictating the scoreboard, I think it diminishes the systemic dominance that Robinson represented.
I don't think it diminishes it. I think it highlights the difference.
Robinson's dominance allowed Atlanta to sustain drives, to chew clock, and to maintain control of the game flow for maybe 50 of the 60 minutes.
But the clock ran out, and Seattle had 1 more point on the board. This is the difference between a systemic advantage and a clutch advantage. Robinson's performance was this constant pressure, a tide that kept rising through the entire game.
Okay.
JSN's performance, particularly those 3 touchdowns, was a series of explosive surgical strikes that countered that tide right at the critical breaking point.
Let's break down the metrics to see that. Robinson's 285 yards came across 35 touches. That gives him an efficiency of about 8.1 yards per touch. Highly efficient, highly sustainable over a long drive.
Very good numbers.
JSN's 137 yards came on just 7 catches for a stunning 19.6 yards per catch.
That's a massive difference.
That efficiency is volatile, you can't live on that, but the scoring leverage is undeniable. JSN's 3 touchdowns represented 18 of Seattle's 50 points, entirely concentrated in just 7 targets.
And that concentration is the entire point. If you are going blow for blow in a 50-49 game, which is ultimately more valuable, a player who forces the opponent to constantly react for 60 minutes, like Robinson, or a player who consistently finishes drives and converts that intense pressure into definitive points, like JSN.
Well, the outcome would suggest the latter.
Seattle's victory suggests that the ability to maximize the outcome of high-leverage possessions, which is what JSN did, is the true tipping point in this specific game of high-stakes, high-scoring football.
I think I have to agree that the victory validates the finisher. It implies that in this modern, explosive environment, traditional efficiency, while it's foundational, is secondary to the ultimate conversion rate in the critical moments. If Seattle is going to rely on Milroe's improvisation, they absolutely need a receiver who can turn those broken plays into gold. JSN is that safety valve and that explosive weapon all rolled into one. His 3 touchdowns represent the moment Seattle converted high-risk decisions into maximum reward, and that negated the 285 yards of systematic pressure that Robinson provided all game.
Robinson's success was controlled and steady, but steady success, when it's met by aggressive, explosive finishing, is what leaves you 1 point short on the scoreboard. The sources confirm that JSN's final touchdown reception happened in a clear passing situation, a critical 3rd and 7. Milroe again extended the play, and JSN adjusted his route perfectly to get open and score. That kind of adaptation and execution under pressure trumps the most perfectly designed running play that Robinson could offer.
It creates a fascinating philosophical comparison. Robinson is the engine. He's forcing the opponent to commit resources and structure their whole game plan around it.
And
JSN is the high-leverage closer, thriving specifically in those moments of maximum pressure. Now, if the game had gone to overtime, Robinson's sustained dominance likely gives Atlanta the advantage in terms of time of possession and yardage control.
But it didn't go to overtime.
Exactly. Because Seattle opted to end it immediately with that 2-point try, the value of JSN's ability to maximize those red zone opportunities proved to be paramount. The ultimate verdict in this environment is that while Robinson owned the field, JSN owned the scoreboard.
And 50 points is the ultimate scoreboard dictation, which leads us necessarily to the single most important decision of the entire game.
Now we arrive at the decision that really defines this entire deep dive. This is the moment that transforms this game from merely a high-scoring classic into this monumental philosophical debate on risk management, on coaching identity, and really the future of the game.
This is where it gets really interesting. And frankly, this is where the gap between traditional legacy thinking and modern analytics-driven execution becomes a chasm, a huge one.
Let's state the critical action clearly for the listener, just so we're all on the same page. Seattle scores late in the 4th quarter. It pulls the score to 48-49. They're down by 1 point.
Yep.
They have the standard choice: kick the extra point, tie the game at 49-49, and force overtime. Instead, the coach chooses to go for the 2-point conversion to win the game outright, 50-49 in regulation.
And they made it. The decisive win is the glorious outcome, the ultimate validation.
But hang on, let's dissect the conservative legacy critique first, because I believe the immediate emotional reaction, that gut feeling of traditionalists, is where the sound analytical foundation actually lies.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this.
Me philosophical position, which is backed by decades of coaching methodology focused on risk mitigation, is clear. I hate the 2-point call.
You hate it.
I hate it. You tie the game, you trust your defense to deliver one stop, and you play overtime. This is framed as the reliable, less volatile approach.
With all due respect, that mindset is analytically flawed, and it completely fails to account for the unique pressure of this specific game environment. That is the definition of letting external variables, like a coin toss and the opponent's ridiculously successful offense, take control of your fate.
Wait, the rationale for conservative play is sound. You would just march the entire length of the field, overcoming maximum pressure, expending maximum offensive energy to tie the game. You have all the momentum.
Exactly, you have the momentum.
So why would you immediately hand the opponent a 50-50 chance to win on a single short yardage play? The volatility of that two-point attempt is immense. Even with peak momentum, league averages show success rates hover somewhere between 45 and 55%. If you fail, you guarantee a loss, 48-49 in regulation. Game over.
And if you trust your defense, you guarantee overtime, where a fresh coin flip determines who gets the first possession in what is essentially sudden death. That dramatically increases their win probability. In a game where your defense has allowed 49 points, placing your trust in them to secure a necessary stop in overtime is the ultimate gamble. It's an article of faith that is unsupported by 60 minutes of evidence.
But the calculation is mathematically clear. Tying the game guarantees you a chance to win. Going for two immediately guarantees that you lose if you fail. The negative label I would attach to that two-point attempt is reckless football.
I'd call it fearless football.
You are betting everything on a 2-yard run or pass attempt where the defense knows exactly what is coming, when you have already proven that your offense can score effectively in a more controlled, standard drive scenario.
And that is precisely why it's not reckless. It's analytically driven confidence. This was a choice of taking control. When you are in a game where both teams have proven they cannot stop each other, going to overtime is simply extending the inevitable shootout and introducing two completely uncontrolled variables: the coin toss and fatigue factor.
Okay, explain the fatigue factor in detail. How does that support the two-point decision?
Well, we saw Atlanta's dominance was driven heavily by Bijan Robinson's 35 touches. Their defense, however, was on the field for nearly 80 total snaps. By the time that final touchdown was scored, both defenses were demonstrably exhausted. They were structurally brittle.
They were on their last legs.
The sources indicate that Seattle believed their offensive personnel advantage, Milroe's improvisation, and JSN's finishing was maximized right then in that moment on the 2-yard line against a tired Atlanta defense that had little time to sub or scheme.
So what you're saying is the momentum from that touchdown drive combined with the extreme defensive fatigue temporarily raised the success rate of the two-point attempt above league average, and that's what justified the decision.
Exactly. Why would you surrender possession to a coin flip, which is pure chance, and give the opponent time to reset their gas defense when you have the ball right there, ready to exploit a known temporary advantage? My counter label for that conservative mindset is this: desperation is defined as punting your fate to overtime and hoping luck saves you. Seattle took control. They said, "We are the better team right now, in this moment, and we will prove it by ending this game on our terms." That is not desperation. That is fearless, calculated football.
Okay, let's explore the long-term implication of this, though. Did this successful, decisive win truly validate this reckless choice? Or did Seattle just get lucky that the play worked? We have to separate the outcome from the strategy.
I think they're intertwined here.
But if Seattle fails that conversion, we are sitting here calling this the most catastrophic coaching decision of the entire year. The success of the play does not retroactively validate the strategy, it only validates the execution. The tension between reckless football and modern football hinges entirely on whether a high-scoring, high-stakes contest fundamentally alters the accepted risk calculus.
And I'm saying in this specific context, it absolutely alters the calculus. If your defense has allowed 49 points, you have no logical reason to trust them in overtime. Furthermore, if you just saw Milroe execute a flawless game-tying drive, you have every reason to trust him for 2 more yards.
It's a leap of faith.
It's a decision rooted in analytical confidence. They knew their offense was an overwhelming force in that exact moment, and they chose to press that advantage immediately rather than introduce the randomness of a coin toss and the pressure of sudden death. They chose a known high-leverage risk over an unknown high-stakes situation.
The only way I can really reconcile this is through the lens of maximizing outcome. Seattle did not prioritize minimizing the chance of losing. They prioritized maximizing the chance of winning definitively. They embraced the volatility.
They did.
The validation, for me, it remains conditional. The validation of guts and situational awareness, it pushes the boundaries of risk tolerance. If every team adopts this philosophy, we're inviting so much more volatility into crucial moments across the league, and that fundamentally changes how defensive coordinators have to approach the end of the game.
And that's the exciting part. This decision cements Seattle as the aggressive vanguard of modern football, valuing point maximization over time and field control. They believe in the power of the singular moment to override 60 minutes of structural play, and by succeeding, they forced the outcome, for better or worse. They made a statement: we finish games. We have spent the vast majority of our time dissecting 99 points of offense, but we absolutely have to pivot to the defensive side, however painful that might be. Because the few plays that were made ultimately tip the scales. This is where we truly reinforce that narrative of survival, even if Seattle was the ultimate survivor.
Correct. Both offenses were historically dominant, which rendered the defenses mostly irrelevant until suddenly they weren't. We cannot analyze this game without acknowledging the defensive failures on both sides, which, that's what necessitated the extreme offensive aggression from Seattle in the first place.
Atlanta scored 49 points, Seattle scored 50. It suggests both defenses were, to put it mildly, structurally insufficient to control the game flow.
An understatement.
So let's first look at the defensive failures that facilitated Atlanta's success. The sources we read all highlight significant miscommunications in Seattle's secondary, and they name names: Julian Love, Jalen Petrie, and Nick Emenwari, that contributed heavily to Cousins' 6 touchdowns.
Indeed. Cousins' high completion rate, even with moderate pressure, really came down to isolating those personnel. Specifically against play action, Seattle often utilized this passive cover 2 look, which forces their safeties, Love and Petrie, to maintain depth.
And Atlanta knew this.
They repeatedly exploited the weakness in the middle of the field, where the cornerbacks like Emenwari and the safeties failed to pass off receivers crossing the face of the goalposts. This structural failure in coverage, particularly over the middle, led directly to 3 separate touchdowns for Atlanta. It was a schematic breakdown.
And it wasn't just the coverage. The run defense wasn't setting the edge consistently either, which is what allowed Robinson to get loose for his explosive 80-yard play. Seattle was simply not structurally equipped to handle the combined threat of Robinson and Cousins' precision passing.
And yet, despite this comprehensive failure on their part, Atlanta's defense had a veteran moment that mattered. We have to highlight the key interception by Jesse Bates III.
Huge play.
When Milroe got a little sloppy, forcing a throw into tight coverage in the red zone, Bates came up with a pick. That's a veteran play. That is a defense executing its assignment in a critical high-pressure situation, and it prevented Seattle from taking a commanding lead mid-game. That's the kind of play disciplined teams rely on.
And Seattle answered right back. That is the critical difference in this whole survival narrative. Atlanta forced the momentum swing, but Seattle immediately negated it. Okada came up with a pick of his own later in the contest, disrupting a potential Atlanta scoring drive deep in Seattle territory.
A direct counterpunch.
It illustrates Seattle's ability to immediately answer high-pressure moments, even if their overall defensive play was demonstrably poor for 95% of the game.
So that's what we have to analyze. This concept of just enough plays. We listed Love, Petrie, and Emenwari and the secondary guys who struggled for large portions of the night, yet they made just enough plays. What does that phrase actually imply in a 50-point game?
I think it implies timing over consistency and opportunism over structural integrity. Atlanta needed their defense to be structurally sound, to slow the pace, to force punts. That just didn't happen.
Not at all.
Seattle's defense, on the other hand, they only needed to be available for the clutch moment, the desperation throw, the high-risk gamble by the opposing offense. Their success wasn't in preventing points, it was in timing their defensive contributions perfectly to neutralize the opponent's clutch moments.
And I think that's the difference between needing defensive perfection, which is the goal of a control-based philosophy, and simply needing timing in playoff-style, high-octane football.
Yeah.
Bates' interception for Atlanta was structural brilliance. He identified and exploited a mistake in Milroe's decision-making. Okada's interception for Seattle was an immediate counter, preventing Atlanta from capitalizing on the momentum shift Bates had created. These turnovers, as few as they were, dramatically shifted the expected point value of those possessions.
The defense matters because it determines the threshold for success. If Seattle's defense had simply performed at an average, league standard level, this game isn't 50-49, it's probably 50-30, and the 2-point decision never even happened.
Right, the context is completely different.
The fact that the defense failed to control the game is what necessitated the reckless aggression of the offense. Therefore, the few defensive plays that did occur were not indicators of strategic prowess, but momentary clutch reprieves that enabled the offense to keep pace and survive long enough to attempt the final definitive winning action.
and that clutch timing is everything. When you look at the modern game, it's not about shutting down the opponent for 60 minutes anymore. It's about winning the turnover battle or preventing that crucial fourth down conversion.
Yeah.
Both defenses here failed the structural integrity test. But Seattle's secondary, despite being burnt repeatedly, made that one more play when the moment absolutely demanded it. In this game, clutch timing beat consistency.
Clutch defense combined with fearless offense. It's a recipe for high blood pressure for sure, but apparently it's also a recipe for a 10-2 record built right on the edge of disaster.
So let's try and synthesize all these contradictory data points now and conclude this debate on what this game really signifies for both of these teams moving forward.
Okay.
I think the single greatest contradiction in this entire game is that Atlanta outgained Seattle, and significantly so. They amassed 512 total yards of offense compared to Seattle's 477.
Yeah, that's a key point.
They moved the ball consistently, they scored late, and they answered over and over again.
Which is exactly why we have to acknowledge this was not a choke by Atlanta. They were executing their system at an incredibly high level. They didn't collapse under pressure. They were simply out-finished and out-leveraged on the critical conversion rate.
Correct. Atlanta's superior yardage generation, driven heavily by Robinson's near 300-yard output and Cousins' high-efficiency passing, that implies they were the better team in terms of sustained systemic offense, and they executed the structure perfectly. However, yardage superiority doesn't translate to victory if you suffer from efficiency drops in the critical zones, like the red zone.
And here's the bottom line, right? Why did Atlanta lose despite having superior yardage? Seattle finished drives and took the risk. Yardage is only relevant if it converts to points at the highest possible rate. Atlanta settled for fewer points per yard than Seattle did. The analytical breakdown shows that Seattle used those high-risk, high-reward plays, Milroe's improv, JSN's clutch TDs, and of course, the two-point attempt to maximize their offensive possessions into maximum points.
The sources show Atlanta kicked 2 field goals early in the game that, had they attempted touchdowns and succeeded, would have put them comfortably ahead.
Those are the hidden points.
They also had a drive stall after the Bates interception that ended in a punt. These are moments where that reliance on structure and caution cost them a potential 7 or even 14 points. Seattle's philosophy, conversely, dictated that every possession must end in 7 points if at all possible.
And this really defines the team identity crisis for Atlanta, I think. They prove they belong in this championship conversation. They prove they can go blow for blow with the league's most dangerous, aggressive team.
No doubt about that.
Their legacy takeaway from this is that they are structurally elite, but they need to clean up the conversion rate in the red zone and embrace a little bit more aggression. If they execute one single drive differently, if they maximize the scoring potential after that Bates pick, we're telling a completely different story right now. They were defeated by the scoreboard, not by the field.
And what about Seattle's identity? What does this prove about them?
It proves they are not just good, they are dangerous, they are volatile, and they must be terrifying to play against. They win with stars, exemplified by Milroe's improvisation and JSN's definitive finishing power. They win with guts, evidenced by that two-point call. And critically, they have proven they have the singular ability to end a game on one play, leveraging momentum and confidence to overcome these huge structural deficits in their defense.
And that identity is exhilarating, but as you said earlier, it's potentially fragile. Seattle's legacy from this game is built entirely on the success of that one final high-risk conversion. It cements them as the aggressive vanguard of modern football, valuing point maximization over time and field control. They believe in the power of the singular, gutsy moment to override 60 minutes of structural play.
And the scoreboard affirms that belief. It's a difficult conclusion for the traditionalist who champions control and risk mitigation, I get that, but it's a necessary one for the modern student of the game.
Which is?
In a shootout, the ability to finish definitively, even if it requires maximum risk, outweighs the ability to simply sustain momentum. The decisive win validates the aggression. So, let's wrap up our key takeaways for you, the listener. This deep dive into the 50-49 showdown reveals this really profound conflict that touches on the very philosophical foundation of competition. The victory was, undeniably decisive on the scoreboard. It ended 50-49 in regulation, which eliminated all doubt of a tie or overtime.
However, that philosophical reliance on high-risk decisions, specifically the choice to bypass overtime for the two-point attempt, makes it a victory built right on the edge of disaster. Atlanta's structured excellence which was marked by Cousins' steady play and Robinson's dominance of the field, was ultimately defeated by Seattle's aggressive finishing power and the sheer audacity of their coaching staff to choose outcome maximization over risk mitigation.
This game felt like January already. It had the weight, the stakes, and the intensity of a championship contest. It was high-stakes football that revealed the true competitive identities of both of these teams. Atlanta, the disciplined contender seeking control and efficiency, and Seattle, the fearless risk-taker demanding immediate finality. They chose to press the advantage when they had it, rather than deferring to chance.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you to mull over as you consider the evolution of the sport. If the modern game, especially at the elite level, increasingly favors high-risk aggression over defensive control, as demonstrated by the outcome of this 50-49 Classic and the statistical validation of that final two-point attempt, how does that fundamentally change how we evaluate strategic decision-making in high-pressure environments?
That's a huge question.
Does relying on sheer guts and the successful execution of one play ultimately prove to be mathematically unsustainable over the long term, even if it worked in this spectacular instance? Or is the capacity for high-risk, high-reward plays now a non-negotiable strategic necessity for championship contention, forcing all teams to embrace volatility?
Something to think about the next time your team faces that agonizing decision between a simple tie and a decisive win. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.